Well, today on the podcast, we've got Jeremy MacDonald. Dude, how is it going, man?
It's going really great. It is wonderful and wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for saying yes to this. It's been a cool kind of journey. I've known you from the past when you worked at Connexus Church in Barrie, and you're now out east, man. Like, why don't you just give us a breakdown of who you are, what you're about, what's going on in your life, and we can get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, sure thing. So my name is Jeremy MacDonald, and yeah, we knew each other. I worked at a church in Ontario called Connexus. I've been in vocational ministry for just over 10 years, and about a year and a half ago, my family we moved back to the East Coast. So I'm from New Brunswick, or from Nova Scotia originally, but grew up in New Brunswick, and so we're back in the hometown, right by the high school I went to high school with and it's been really great. So we're raising three kids. We've got a 5-year-old, 2.5-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And
So you got
nowadays
a
I
busy
get
life.
to, yeah, the kids stuff is certainly it's certainly a season. And then on the work side of things, I work for an organization called the Youth Worker Community, and so we are just all about trying to help the next generation know Jesus, and we do that through all sorts of great ministries across our country, Canada, and then a little bit beyond
Mhm.
as well, and do that in lots of different ways.
That's cool, man. That's amazing. I for people that are listening right now, because I've got a little bit of an audience that might be identify as Christians. Yep, I'm a Jesus follower. They understand maybe the little lingos of what we're going to say maybe today. And then we've also got people that are tuning in that maybe are unchurched or maybe checking in or kind of intrigued. I've got friends and people are in my life and in my circle that listen to this podcast, mainly maybe for support, but also love to hear these conversations with people across Canada and the world that we're having conversations with. So yeah, just to let everyone know right now, this might be a little bit more of a podcast geared towards the Christian faith and living that out, because Jeremy is such an incredible leader when it comes to that. And he's kind of said that he works for youth worker community, um, but it's also about really reaching the next generation of people. And Jeremy, why don't you kind of tell us, because like you said, you were with Connexus and now you're back out east, you're back home with family and stuff. What was the transition like? How did youth worker come about? What was that all? How'd that work out?
Yeah, yeah. So, just on the personal front, the move back east for us was to be a little closer to family, and so I've got some family that just have some health challenges that we're getting difficult to be helpful
Uh,
for from being far away. So being in the same city has been really great, just to be practically helpful in that regard, and we felt like that was like like a pretty important calling for us, and so
hmm,
lots of people, you look out for your folks and for your parents. And we just think that that's a worthwhile thing. It's actually something that God might actually call
hmm,
people to. So that was that. And then as we were coming, not necessarily knowing what we'd jump into, I had lots of connections out here. I wasn't super concerned, but a buddy of mine, Sid Coop, was has been doing this youth worker stuff for a very long time, and had some new dreams and visions. And he and I had done some projects together. And so he said, "Why don't we work together on some stuff?" And so I joined in on his team. It's a small group. It's a small team, and very small nonprofit, and we get a chance to try and make a big impact. And so yeah, so that's been good. It's been different, like it's a completely
hmm.
different thing. So for anybody that doesn't realize, vocational ministry, if you're pastoring, it's in some ways an event driven job. Like every 7 days you
Yeah.
have a big event, and you get everybody together, and it's there's a lot that goes into it. And so stepping away from that has just been a completely different pace and a different structure to the week and the things that we do. But we've certainly enjoyed getting a
Hmm.
chance to make an impact in a different kind of way with our organization.
Quick question there with the whole usually planning for 7 day event. What have you noticed with this transition of going to more of a ministry based organization that is about attracting youth? What have you noticed about yourself or the interesting things that are different from planning every 7 days?
Yeah, I think it has reminded me of the value of those 7 days. So one of the things
Wow.
about being in the trenches of actually planning it is a lot of your week is taken up in that one event. So by the time you get to the one event, you've thought about it, you've planned for it, you've prepared for it, all that kind of stuff. On this side of things, and especially with three young kids, the rhythm of finding a place where community
Mm.
is present, people are going to care for you, that there's going to be some teaching that might convict you and that
Yeah.
might move you in a different direction. Like that's just so valuable, actually.
Yeah.
And where it isn't as available or readily available in this COVID season, we've really missed that for our family and for our kids. But being in this different kind of role, I've just gotten more excited about what happens. Typically on Sunday mornings, but lots of churches do it at different times. But through the local church and through this weekly event that we might call a Sunday service, or that Kanye West calls a Sunday service.
Yeah, dude. Okay, so you did something really good there. So you are a youth guy, and you just brought in pop culture right in. You connected really well
Sure.
with that, with the Kanye West Sunday service, and I love that. That's so funny, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, this conversation and why I wanted to chat with you is because of the next generation of youth. Um, there is so much going on in our world, in our culture, and in our Canadian culture that's shaping youth massively in so many different ways. You're seeing so many things happen at a younger age, and you're seeing things progressively move faster at a younger age. And what makes you passionate about youth? What is something that is just like you cannot stop thinking about reaching youth and impacting them? Because this podcast is all about influence, right? So you're influencing incredible amount of people through your heart of generosity to the youth.
Yeah, I think everybody, like if you're listening and you're older than 20, like you had obviously a season in your life that you were a teenager, and that
Mm-hmm.
if you look back, you have certain memories. It might be fond memories, it might be terrible memories, but usually what happens in adolescence is some pretty formative experiences,
Mm-hmm.
for better or for worse. And I think what we are recognizing, even as a culture, is that if we're going to take seriously some of the big problems that we're facing in our world today and in our culture when it comes to justice issues or inequality issues, so much of those kinds of things are worth dealing with, or at least trying to help and sort out at the adolescent age, or even younger than that. And so anybody that works with children and youth, I think the great news is that, as difficult as it can be, there's a ton of hope that comes from trying to help solve some problems for folks at that age onwards, and it has an impact well beyond the moment, because if you change somebody's adolescent years for the better, then you affect the rest of their lives, and then
Mm-hmm.
all of the people that they could affect as well. And so there's just great opportunities. My like pivotal moment, to paint a vivid picture of it, is when I was in grade 12. I was kind of sensing what in the Christian circles we would call like a call to ministry.
Yeah.
This idea that I would actually get to do vocational ministry, that I would become a pastor. So that was kind of in the back burner of my mind, and I was on with my friends and with my youth group. We did a missions trip to Cambodia, of all places. So
Oh
from Moncton, New
wow.
Brunswick, to Southeast Asia, and we're in the Kampong Cham province of Cambodia, and like in kind of outside of the main cities, and just interacting with other teenagers. And one of the nights that we gathered together just with our team leader, our youth pastor, was talking about like, hey, what's happening in your heart? How is this
Mm.
experiencing changing you to be outside of your own culture, your own experience, your own home and safety, and experience life in a different place? And so I listened to all my friends, like my friends that I knew and loved and hung out with, and they talked about things like, well, I can't wait to become a pharmacist, because when I become a pharmacist, I'll have the
Yeah.
skills needed to bring medicine to people that
Mm-hmm.
desperately need just even simple medicines. And somebody else had said like, oh, I can't wait to be a nurse, and when I'm a nurse, like I want to be able to bring help and healing to folks that can't offer it for themselves. And around the room, somebody, I can't wait to be a business person so I can fund the things that are going to make our world a better place for others. And so as I heard all those things, I thought, my gosh, I can't wait to be a youth pastor so that I can make
Mm-hmm.
sure that there's a generation of teenagers that see the world in a different light and live beyond themselves and their own personal pleasure, so that they can make a difference around them. Because what my friends are experiencing right now, I want for hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of other teenagers going forward. So that's been kind of like the like long story journey of where I've been at,
Yeah.
and the passion that comes with it.
Yeah. I was literally gonna ask you. I was thinking today about this. Like usually when you're passionate about something, you experience something.
Yeah.
And I love that story of hearing your friends. And I had the similar kind of experience growing up in youth group and stuff like that, and Christian circles. And it was so interesting to see, um, and I understand we have all different giftings, we all have different talents, but it was so fascinating when I got to that end of high school age, when you're making massive decisions, to see and hear so many kids and so many teenagers want to do something outside of the church world, who were Christians, right? They were like, yep, I'm a Christian. I'm a Jesus follower. I do believe what he's done for me. He died for my sins, and I want to follow him until the day I die. And it was so interesting to hear the fact that there were so many people that wanted to have other jobs. And I love, and I understand there's got to be jobs in other areas that people go to, but hearing someone like yourself say, hey, like, I'm actually a teenager right now, and I'm already passionate about the people that are younger than me, that are actually probably being born at this moment while I'm in Cambodia. Like, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I just think that's so great to hear the passion, about this. And so I guess where I want to ask you is, when it comes to having youth in your circle, whether it's a church, whether it's a family, whether it's a nonprofit organization, whatever it is, if you as a leader, if you had a chance to talk to a bunch of kids, um, about the impact that they could have, what would you chat to them about?
About the impact that they could have personally, like
Yeah,
around them.
personally, like what would you chat with them about? Like if you could just talk about anything.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of times, younger generations are inspired by the possibilities of impact, and so the opportunity of making a difference in the world. I had a small group leader actually when I was in high school, and a leader on that Cambodia trip, um, who he used to tell this story of his wife would ask him like, "Why do you spend so much time with these grade
Mm,
11, 12 guys? Like, they're stinky, they're crass, they're whatever. Like it's a lot of time that you put into them." And here's this business guy, like this, well-to-do business guy that had a lot of other options and that he could be doing his time. He said, "I love spending time with teenagers because they still believe they can change the world." And I think for a
mm,
lot of folks, the crushing realities of life sometimes eke out our optimism and eke out our creativity about what we could
mm,
do and the way that we could have an impact. But at the teenager level, when you're a teen, I think you're more apt to be open to that creativity and more apt to be
mm.
optimistic. So when I get a chance to talk, with teenagers, one of the things I think, and this is coming from obviously a Christian perspective, I'm a
Yeah.
Jesus follower. We reference that, but I think the gospel message, when somebody chooses to give their life to Christ, to
Mm,
Jesus, this Jesus who lived 2,000 years ago and was died and resurrected and now lives to this day, like,
mm-hmm,
man, that actually has a dramatic impact. That if more teenagers get inspired by the person of Jesus and give their life to him, like, their schools could be dramatically different.
mm,
Our culture and our cities could be dramatically different. The stats on all of the bad things and injustice in our world could be dramatically different if there's a generation that rises up and says, "Oh, we actually want to live out our lives the way that Jesus has called us to." And
mm-hmm,
we know just from stats, like from the honest statistics about how life goes and like the ups and
mm-hmm,
downs of things, that when people make that kind of decision, all of the right metrics start going in the good
mm-hmm.
direction. And so I just get excited when we could see that kind of dramatic impact in our communities through the gospel.
Do you think do you think it is important to help the next generation, um, understand the urgency of the gospel? There's so many things that are going on right now that, there's a sense of urgency of, staying safe, or making sure you have your life all figured out to where you want to live and where you want to, raise a family and where you want to work. There's an urgency that culture says, like, you have to have things in order and ready to rock and roll in life. How do we, as people that see the value in next generation, let them understand, hey, the gospel is also a very urgent thing for this world to know?
Yeah, I think one of the hacks to that conversation is helping that people connect the dots between what the gospel actually is and means and the way that it shapes our lives
Mm-hmm.
and the way that even our current cultural conversation is aching for somebody to bring truth to a situation.
Yeah.
So, for example, like obviously, the rise of the Me Too movement and this conversation about the awful oppression of women and the sexual
Hmm.
exploitation of women. Like it is crazy how rampant that has
Yeah.
been culturally. But you look to high schools and you realize, man, it is like no joke and no surprise for a grade 12 girl to think like, oh yeah, that's what life is like after high school, because life as a grade 12 girl in high school right now is filled with all sorts of the same type of exploitation.
Yeah.
The request for images, the request for sex, the
Mm.
request for, and not request as if it's like a question or an ask. It's like more of the demand
Yeah.
and the blackmail and all that kind of stuff. So all that stuff is happening inside of the life of high school students and inside of schools. And so then you think about, okay, well, what is the gospel? Well, Jesus was the most progressive,
Mm.
women's rights person in history, and has done more for women than honestly anybody else you could find. And so, if you realize that the justice that Christ calls us to is
Mm.
meant to play out so that there is there is equality, and that there is safety, and that there is the ability for somebody to show up at school and not be worried that they're going to be abused or
Hmm.
trafficked, even if you go
Yeah.
and use a strong word like that. So because of that, what if we actually called students to this self-sacrificial kind of life that Jesus actually wants for us,
Mm.
that it would make a dramatic impact in their world, but it would start in their own world. So rather than necessarily convincing them they need to change the entire world and all
Hmm.
of the issues that are out there, what if you could change your high school, and what would that mean, and what could that look like, and what would that mean to actually respect women and teach guys in particular that they could be respectful of
Hmm.
their peers. And so that's where I go when I start to think about like what's possible and what
Yeah.
is inspiring about the gospel, even though there is a cost associated with it, obviously, but it
Yeah.
has a direct connection to some of the challenges that at least we're hearing about and that people are talking about
Mm.
and wanting to deal with, but not necessarily understanding how to actually get at the root issue. And for those of us that, again, call Christ our King, we recognize the root issue in all of these things is actually sin. And so
Hmm.
it's no surprise to us that the sin would turn into sinfulness and a sinful society and all sorts of terrible ramifications.
Hmm.
The challenge for us is just to help understand how to communicate a way forward and to find salvation and freedom from our sin
Hmm.
so that our culture can actually be healed. But I think that's what we're called to. So I'm in
Yeah.
for the journey, as hard as it is.
So how is youth worker community helping the next generation with this kind of stuff to understand it? Are there avenues that you guys are doing? Because I checked out your website. There seems to be a lot of good stuff going on with you guys.
Yeah, so interesting for us, and again, just if people don't realize this culture of ministry to teenagers and adolescents, the next generation, we've learned from our research, like actual real research,
Hmm.
in our country of Canada, and reading some of the reports from abroad, that one of the best ways you can actually help a teenager in any area of their life is to provide some type of mentorship, to offer
Hmm.
them, this other person living life authentically and allowing that life lived authentically to be an instrument for ministry and helping to point somebody forward. So what we try to do is, in the same way as you might expect, if you're coming from outside the church, like a big brothers big sisters type of thing,
Yeah,
we're
that's a great
trying to
example. Yeah.
yeah, we're trying to say that's the ticket. So can we, as Christians in particular, find all the places that Christians gather, whether it be Youth for Christ or Young Life or InterVarsity clubs or in the churches, youth
Mm.
pastors, all that kind of stuff, and instead of just trying to tell teenagers the truth, that we can show them it lived out in the context of relationship. So as youth worker community, we're trying to connect all of these different ministries with this, like, I think the best way to do ministry, which is a particular number of adults investing into a particular number of
Hmm.
teenagers for the sake of helping them grow into their
Hmm.
faith and grow into adulthood. And so that's what we do, and then we just do it through a bunch of random means. So we do a podcast, we do
Hmm.
education at the bachelor's and master's level, and we do professional coaching, and we do conferences and all that kind of stuff, but
Hmm.
all to reinforce the fact that when a volunteer, and it's a volunteer, it's not a paid thing, when a volunteer says, I want to invest in the next generation, can we give them the tools that they need so that they can do that really well?
What are you guys noticing with people that are ready to invest in the next generation, like the mentorship? What are you guys noticing the benefits? Like obviously there's so many benefits to it, but what's something right now with, and here's where I come from this question, because there's so much shaping the next generation. I said that earlier in the podcast. You've got TikTok, Instagram, Omegle or whatever it's called now, FaceTiming on the internet randomly with people. And you've got so many things coming at youth. What are you noticing the importance of mentorship? Because mentors have been around for a long time. Like that thread and that style of leadership and investing in people has been around for. I had mentors when I was growing up. What are you noticing right now that mentors need to be focusing on in this time with youth?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's that we need more. So like, there's more teenagers than there are
Mm,
mentors for sure. And then the other thing is just to clarify that what that mentorship role is. Like, it is actually pretty. It needs to be specific. It needs to be formalized in some way,
mm,
so that there's safety for the teenager to recognize, like, oh, this is the person that I can talk to. They're going to be here in 6 months. It's great to do informal things,
mm,
but specific things are usually better. So we like that for mentors, and so we try to structure it in a way that isn't that is scalable. So if you're like, hey, I'm an adult and I want to invest in the next generation, it's not like you roam the streets looking for a teenager and say, hey, can I mentor you? Like, at that point, you get arrested, and rightly so. So instead, we try to structure, ministries and churches
mm,
around this type of mentorship as the core part of what they do programmatically,
mm,
so that it's easy to make that connection. And then for the mentors, for them just to realize, oh, what you need to know isn't necessarily all the new hip and cool things. What you need to know
yeah.
is the teenagers that are in front of you. Like, you become a student of them to understand who they are and how God's
Mm,
wired them. And then you have to have, again, from our faith perspective, you have to have a strong faith and belief that, as you live your life following Christ, that's the most worthwhile thing a person could do. And if you live your life authentically following
mm,
Him, then you will be able to direct and help point the students that you've got around you in that same way.
mm. I like I like how you said mentorship needs to have structure,
Yeah.
and it needs to have structure. I think that is, um, there's so many other things in this world right now that are spontaneous and, um, people like I heard John Mark Comer say there's so many spiritual practices now, but spiritual is such a buzzword because spiritual means everything, but also means nothing. And right now I'm watching the next generation from kind of from afar a little bit. I've got a few guys in my life that I invest in, and I find so much joy just talking to them and letting them lead, and then letting them question, and then letting them dream. Um, I find it that when I do believe that there's a point for me to actually ask structured questions, it helps them to understand that it's okay to have structure.
Mhm.
You don't have to chase the next fix. You don't have to chase structure. Actually helps them really. And I say to the guys that I talk to, like, you don't have to answer right away. Like, you don't have to have the right answers too. This is the whole point of doing life, is to explore but also grow in it. And hopefully you're growing your root system of your faith in the relationship with Jesus at that point. But I love that structure. Like, can you open up more of that? Like, what it means to, because we got guys in our church that have been reaching out to me and saying, hey, we want to lead a young adults group. We're really feeling called, that the Spirit of God is saying, hey, we would love to lead 5 to 6 dudes that are now young professionals, but we want to help them in life and guide them in life. Can you open up that structure part? Like,
Yeah, I think I just appreciate. I overemphasize this personally, and so I need people in my life that balance out on the other side. But
mm-hmm,
precision in your language, precision in what you're trying to accomplish. Your outcomes, your
mm,
goals, the direction, clarity, all that kind of stuff. That is, if it's missing, the unfortunate thing is that you can put a lot of energy into something and end up not going anywhere. And
mm,
so what we try to do, and when I say we, what I like to see, I guess, happen is that in where you want to see growth take place in any kind of relationship or habit or
mm-hmm,
like anything at all, being precise in what you want to see happen and tracking along the way is going to be your friend, because it actually gives you the tools to say, oh yeah, I did the thing that I wanted to do.
mm,
So I like, I'm doing a little bit of running, and running's hard and I don't like it all the time and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things about running, it's like, man, when I track my run, I get the
Mm-hmm.
distance and I get the time, which gives me a little bit of my pace tracking. And so if I want to push myself, it's pretty clear what I need to do to push myself. I need to either run longer or I need to run faster. And so, at least for me, there's lots of days when I just want to go for a run and go for a run to enjoy the outside. And like, that's awesome. You probably need those things. But if you're trying to accomplish something, some days you really do need to look at the numbers and say, are we doing what we really wanted to do? Are we setting out and
Mm-hmm.
accomplishing something? And I think mentorship and faith, your faith are very similar in those kinds of ways. Even like your important relationships, like marriage, is worthwhile being a little bit more precise sometimes to say like, man, what is the direction that we want to go? What can I paint a picture of a preferred future?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would I like us to be better at in 2 years' time than we are right now? Like, is it possible that I could actually enjoy my family more in 5 years than I do today? And I would love to say with my optimistic nature, like, yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah.
you're going to need to think strategically about how to get there and what steps are you taking, because we don't just naturally drift into excellence. We
Mm-hmm.
usually drift into isolation and doom scrolling on social, and like that's where we drift right into
Mm-hmm.
potato chips and Big Macs. So it takes intentionality to actually make progress. So that, on the context of relationships and mentorship, means what are the outcomes of this group? So you got a few guys who are like, hey, we want to hang out and we want to talk about
Mm-hmm.
things and do life together. It's like, okay, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Well, like, we want to grow in our faith. Okay, what does that actually mean? Like, what part of your faith do you want to experience growth in? Are you
Mm-hmm.
frustrated that you're not in the scriptures enough? Are you frustrated that you don't feel God moving in your life enough? Are you
Mm-hmm.
frustrated that you don't see fruit of your spiritual journey in the people around you? And so now you're starting to tease out, like, I wonder if this group could be about experiencing like miracles that God wants to do in and through us and the people around us. So then you're like, okay, so this is like a miracle small
Hmm.
group. So now when you get together, you're praying for like wisdom to know where does God
Wow.
want to do a miracle, and then you're actually saying to the guys, okay, you're praying for a miracle for your neighbor, so now you actually have to take the step and go talk to your neighbor, and then when you come back next week, we're going to talk about it. Well, all of a sudden faith is lived out in such a tangible way because you can't get around the fact that you have to go talk to your neighbor about something.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like it's worth getting precise in my mind
Mm-hmm.
about some of these things.
Man, my jaw could hit the floor with that. I think I think listening to that and hearing that is quite powerful, because when you step into the moment and define what your mentorship may be with this group of people or an individual, you're actually stepping into the presence of what the Spirit of God wants to do with this relationship. And I love how you said actually earlier that you're actually directing the potential of a life, or you said something like that earlier, where in a mentorship role or an investing role of a friend, um, you have the potential to change the direction of a life that is full of fruit, hopefully miracles, generosity. um, Help us understand the potential of investing in someone like that.
Yeah, so one of the things, this is like mentorship 2.0, or like if you're volunteering in youth ministry, we
Mm-hmm.
might call you a small group leader or youth leader. So it's like this
Mm-hmm.
2.0 skill that it's clear to talk about, but it's hard to actually implement in your
Mm-hmm.
in your relationship. So we might say something like, what's the next step spiritually for the person that you're working with and for all the people that you're working with. So if you've
Mm-hmm.
got 6 people on your roster that you're investing into, what's their next step spiritually? It's the same thing if you have a direct report. Like if you are working at a job and somebody's reporting to you, one of the things you should do as a leader is to think, not only are they showing up to work on time, sorry, let me just say what I need to say first, but that with your direct reports, you would have, what's the next step if they were to grow a little bit and become
Mm-hmm.
more of who they should be, or more of who God's made them to be, or more of, be all they can be, depending on if you need spiritual language for it or not. What's the next step for them? Well, then you, as the leader, as the boss, one of the great gifts is that you could help that person take that step. And
Hmm.
so that's what great managers do. That's what great leaders do. That's what great mentors do. Now, the discernment process of like, okay, what is the next step for David, who's, in my group, and like, man, he's a cool dude, and I'm trying to figure it out. Like, maybe part of the figuring out the next step is you should talk to him about it.
Hmm.
Maybe some of it is, if you're a Christian, you should pray about it and ask the Spirit to open up, like, what is the next thing that the Spirit's calling this person to. And then your role is to speak life and identity into that person and help them into whatever
Mm.
that next thing is. And sometimes it might be like, so that sounds like nice because it's big flowery language, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's like super practical, like, oh man, what we really need is for David to make it through a small group time without farting and everybody, being able to laugh. And so like that's his next step spiritually, is to take this serious
Yeah.
enough that he doesn't fart. And so like maybe start praying that God would bind up his bowels, and like that's going to be the thing. I don't know. But maybe for some students, like you
Mm.
need to take a step at baptism. Maybe for somebody it's like you need to pray for the first time. Maybe for somebody it's like you need to share your faith, or you need to talk about faith. You're a boss and you've got employees. Like for somebody, maybe it's for them to have the confidence to actually lead the meeting, or for them to have the confidence to make
Yeah.
that call, or whatever it might be. But that's the whole developmental mindset that you're trying to be in.
Mhm.
How can I help the people around me continue to become the people that is calling them to be, and how do I get to play my role in that?
Wow. Like, so something comes to my mind when you said that. How do you help them become the people they need to be and how God wants them to be? This you do you movement um, is just so damaging.
Sure, yeah.
Um, I was watching a hockey game the other day, and it was the Arizona Coyotes, and I have the NHL package, so I'm watching tons of hockey right now in quarantine and lockdown and stuff like that. And they get to choose their advertisements, right?
Yeah.
And there's this massive banner in the seats because there's no fans, and it says "You do you."
Yeah,
And
who
I
is
was
that?
like,
Is that Nike now or somebody?
I
Who's
don't
doing
know
that?
who it is, man, but I could not believe the fact that we're even just promoting the fact that you need to do you, you need to find self, you need to find your best, don't worry about anyone else. And it's such a false teaching of you do you, because truly it's not what you do you, it's what God wants for you.
Yeah.
And I think right now, and this is why I go back to, there's so much going on within youth culture that they're being formed by so many things. And I
So
just pray. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, so here's what I think is there's the incongruence in that people feel this really strong dissonance around why that has become a cultural
Hmm.
mantra, is that if you live your life in such a way that you have an ideal of what you're supposed to be, and it's like, man, I need to become Justin Bieber, or I need to become,
Hmm.
an NFL player, an NBA, NHL player, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
This ideal that you start to shape in your mind, and like this goes into all like any different realms of what's influencing you,
Hmm.
like wherever your influences are, you form this ideal that's not even actually like a real human being, right? Like it's a
Mm.
farce because it's so idealistic. And then you realize as a teenager, I can never live up to that. Or you realize as an adult, maybe, as a 20-year-old, you're like, oh, I can't be, out on the yacht and have all the money and have
Yeah.
all, like, that's not, it's too idealistic. And so when you're faced with that dissonance about that
Hmm.
idealistic picture, then it's a safe mantra to say you do you, because now it's like, okay, now what I need to find is what's already inside of me that I just
Mm.
need to rest in and be happy with. And so instead of being, this awful identity that I'll never be able to achieve,
Yeah.
I'm trying to determine what's inside of me already, because that's going to be easy. Well, the issue with that is that we all realize our own personal identities that we just are holding on to in this moment. We don't
Yeah.
want, like, there's so much
Yeah.
about ourselves that, as much as we try to just do you and just be happy with who you are, we're recognizing there's all sorts of things about me that I want to change. And like,
Yeah.
sure, maybe some of that's not correct, and some of that needs to be like in context of community. Somebody needs to call out what's wrong about, being down on myself. But there's other parts where I'm like, oh no, part of why I know that my where I'm at isn't where I should be is
Mm.
because it's not where I should be. Like, I should
Yeah.
actually become a better dad. I should actually become a better husband. That's not a
Hmm.
bad thing to think about. So now we're trying to wrestle through with this, like, okay, we're not chasing the ideal because that's like
Hmm.
an oppressive narrative to put on our lives, but we're also not just going to rest in our own personal squalor and filth, because that's not helpful either. What's the way out of this? And that's where, at least as Christians, we might say the gospel is this perfect invitation to
Hmm.
a life that you can never achieve on your own, and yet through the power of Christ, that you could actually experience the freedom of your own appetites, the freedom
Hmm.
of the own things that you get caught up in and are enslaved to, and instead can be free of all those
Yeah.
things and live a life that is perfectly designed for you. So
Mm.
that's kind of like this wonky thing where, yeah, culturally you're like, how do you deal with that? But it's funny seeing the messages out there.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. That's a great way to look at it. And I think that like speaks really to the importance of mentorship and having people that are investing in younger people to show them the realness behind it all as well, right? Like
Mhm.
I've got people in my life like, man, like I used to live like that. You do you and I try to achieve that. And I found it just left me empty and dry and hungry, but I was just trying to find what was best for me, right? And I think that's pretty encouraging to hear that mentorship actually can help people understand that it's more than just you. It's what God wants for you and what he can bring out of you. And that's just great. I'm transition right now and to kind of like a topic of what we're going through right now. And usually you opened up our conversation off a lot with that you were on a missions trip with a youth group. And that's not really happening right now in the world that we're living in, this coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic across this world. And it's affecting people massively and in our world massively. um, I did some research on what's going on with youth worker community, and you guys are actually partnering with Compassion.
Yeah.
And it's the hashtag identify with poverty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Identify with
Can you,
Poverty Challenge. Yeah. Yeah. So Compassion's just this great organization that
mm-hmm,
is aiming to actually end poverty and bring kids out of poverty, but through the name of Jesus. And so it's a Christian organization, works through local churches around the world.
mm-hmm,
And so it's a child sponsorship style program. So we as our family have a particular family, a kid that we sponsor, that we fund, so that this kid can get access to education. His family get access to some food and things that they need, necessities. And so that's Compassion. Now, what they recognized is that in light of the fact that we can't take kids out of their comfort zone because they're not allowed to leave their comfort zone, like they're not allowed to leave their house, is what can you do to create a global mindset inside of a teenager's life? And so this Identify with Poverty Challenge is a really great idea for 6 weeks to take each week a different challenge that forces you to think outside of your own context. And so one of
yeah.
the examples is like you don't sleep in your bed, you sleep on the floor. You have limited access to water for a week, and limited access to electricity. These are the kinds of things that most people experience. And when you travel around the world, you understand like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
most people don't have clean water at their tap like we do. So the minute that you realize that, it
Mm-hmm.
hopefully will start to adjust your appreciation level for what you actually have. This is my
Yeah.
story from a number of years ago when I did do a traveling and kind of caught that. And so now I pray before my meals, not for God to bless the Big Mac and turn it into broccoli, but for instead to thank God that I have clean water at every single one of my
Mm.
meals. And that's just become a rhythm for us. So Identify with Poverty Challenge is something you can do with teenagers. You can do it on your own. Right off of our main site, youthworker.community, you can find the link right to it. But again, the idea is to make yourself uncomfortable, to understand how privileged we
Mm.
really are, and let that start to change how you view the world around you and the people around you.
I think that's so good to help youth understand what's going on around them. What they have
Mm-hmm.
is quite beautiful and quite amazing. And to help them understand it's not just you and your little bubble. It's not, this world doesn't revolve around you. And there's a lot of other people that are less fortunate. So I love that. When I saw that on the website, I was like, man, that is such an incredible way to get youth into steps of action and steps of moving forward to think about how can I impact or how can I be a part of something that's a lot bigger than just me? How can I help this world? Like you say, we don't have to change the world all at once right now, but it's got to start with the passion has got to be inside. So
Mm-hmm.
to experience something like that, I've been on missions trips. I've been, and it's unfortunate that we can't travel right now and do those things because
Mm-hmm.
it becomes so real. But it also can become so real with this challenge that you guys in Compassion are doing. I love that. Last thing I want to chat with you before we wrap up, and it's along the lines of the mentorship stuff. Again, you guys also say on your website that youth ministry is demanding, but you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah.
What's What's the beautiful part about having other mentors, being in a community with other mentors, or living with people and understanding what it means to pour into these youth?
Yeah, I think in the same way that we want teenagers to not have to go it alone, like even us as
Mm-hmm.
adults, we shouldn't have to go it alone. And so, I've been really fortunate that I've been surrounded by some of the peers that I grew up with that continue to this day to
Yeah.
be people that I can ask questions of and can talk to. But beyond my peers, that again to this day, there's people in my life that are my elder that have more
Mhm.
life experience and wisdom than I do, that I can go to and ask questions to. And I think what that does is it reminds me of what we're trying to offer to teenagers is something
Mhm.
I still need to receive myself, because I miss the boat and miss the mark and I can't see straight some days. And so that's really key. But then on top of that, to get mentors to be able to have community with one another, you just realize that hey, the shared wins sometimes are what you need to keep going, and the shared
Wow.
experiences and the shared hurts are sometimes what you need to realize you're not alone, and this is a normal part of it. So the upside to when we gather, whether it's online or in person, larger
Mhm.
groups of youth workers in particular, is that they get to share some of the stories, and the one win that you might get a year in your role as a mentor, if you can combine that with the one win that these other 12 people are getting, at least everybody has something to celebrate once a month. So now you have got something that can keep you going, and it may not be your month to get a win story, but at
Mhm.
least you know that that's still coming, that that's a part of the journey as well. And then when you have a struggle, you realize that, man, this is not that you're a bad mentor, that you're the wrong person for the role, but sometimes it's just that when you
Mhm.
show up, all the grade six guys want to do is just wrestle and fart on each other. And that's just what happens. And so you have to navigate it because of COVID, and COVID can spread through your farts or whatever. I don't know. But you have to sort out the fact that this isn't always going to be like come to
Mhm.
Jesus moments and everybody's celebrating good things. Sometimes it's just hard work, and sometimes it's just
Yeah.
tough conversations, and sometimes it's kids telling you off, and sometimes it's kids apologizing for telling you off, even though that
Mhm.
was 5 years ago and it took them 5 years to build up the courage to say it.
That's amazing. I love it. Jeremy, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Really enjoy your leadership and your insight and wisdom around how we can love, care, and invest in these next generation that are being raised up right now and also being led right now. So thanks so much, dude.
That was great. Thanks, David.
Have a good one.